Joining me now is Amanda Nguyen, the CEO of Rise. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So there's been a lot of talk in the media lately about the uptick in violence against Asian Americans across the country. Do you have your own personal sense of what you attribute that to? And is it something that's real, or is there something going on with the statistics that is making it appear like it's a rise, but the threat is the same as it's been? What's your read on that?
Those are great questions and nuanced questions, so I'm really glad that you're asking them. This pandemic has undoubtedly seen a rise in attacks against the Asian American community. So over 2,800 attacks have been reported in New York City. The data has showed over 1,000% increase in hate crimes, but crimes against the AAPI community has lasted much longer before COVID. And the reason for that truly boils down to invisibility. I know it sounds very simple, but let me give you some examples. A study in 2009 showed that Asian American Pacific Islanders aren't included in many federal agencies in their definition of racial minorities. That's wild. Another example
why not? They're just included in other,
they're
or
just omitted. We are just omitted. Here's another example. In political polling, Asian Americans are rarely polled. Political parties don't go to door knock to listen to Asian American communities, even if we were the margin of victory in Georgia's most recent election, right? And another example of this is that people don't know our history. They don't know that in the 1800s, we built the railroads, that the internment camps happened, or that the KKK targeted the Vietnamese American community in New Orleans. All of this helps to further perpetuate this, perpetual foreigner stereotype. And that has consequences. Those consequences are lives lost.
And so what do you think is driving the uptick during the pandemic? And there's, violence is up. Violence is up across the board, for a lot of different reasons that we can get into. Is violence against the AAPI community up relative to violence against other communities?
Look, I think leadership really, really matters. Our elected officials took an oath to serve all Americans, and that includes Asian Americans. And when we had people like President Trump who said things like China virus or Kung Flu virus, all of these things have consequences. I want to draw attention to an event that happened March 2020. There was a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old who were stabbed in a grocery store. And the perpetrator on the record said that he stabbed them because he thought they were Chinese, they were Burmese, and he said he stabbed them because he thought they were spreading COVID. This is a direct link to the language that is being used by our leaders. And all elected officials should not only denounce these hate crimes that are clearly a result of targeted attacks against the AAPI community, but also stand up and say, hey, I'm going to elevate AAPI voices.
What's the reaction that you get from people when you try to elevate the concern of this particular violence?
A couple of days ago, I turned on my camera and I made an Instagram video imploring viewers to speak up about this violence. And honestly, when I made it, I thought I would lose followers because every single time I had talked about race before, I did. And what happened was I had seen Asian blogs talk about these horrific, gruesome attacks. So I'm talking about Vicha, who was killed as a result of walking on the street, minding his own business. There was another woman who was lit on fire. A Filipino man in a New York subway was slashed across the face. And when I read about this and I wanted to learn more, the mainstream media did not pick it up. And I was furious. Why don't our stories matter? Why don't our lives matter? And so when I did that Instagram video, I called for people to tag outlets, and overnight, millions of people rallied to call to action. So 3 million people watched that video overnight. 11.4 million posts on TikTok went up the next day in response. And I just want to thank everyone because it shows that even though systematic structural narrative places like the media, also like the federal agency in defining data collection, when these places lock us out, that still doesn't mean that we don't have a voice. And we can turn to platforms like social media, but even just within our neighborhood and communities to speak up about what we care about.
And what can people do? Like, what is the next action?
The solution here to invisibility is visibility. So what does that mean? The API community is at an inflection point right now. The question is, what's next? And it's hard for people to empathize with our pain if they don't know our stories. So the goal here is to create empathy, and we can combat xenophobia and racism by humanizing the API community. The only way for this to be beat is for our stories to be told. So I'm calling on leaders, elected leaders, to speak up. I'm calling on not only the White House, but governors and mayors. I want to see accountability. President Biden had an executive memorandum, and I want to see what specifically will come out from that, concrete steps. And for folks at home who want to get involved, you can do so at Rise. You can go to risenow.us/donate. If you want to volunteer, go to risenow.us. This will be not only done by our elected leaders, but ultimately from the people, from us.
Is there any kind of legislative ask or policy ask involved here?
Look, there are multiple resolutions that have been introduced in the United States Congress. I think Grace Meng, Andy Kim, these are members of Congress who have been spearheading them. And I think they're valiant efforts. But if we really want to tackle this, I want to see a hearing on the Department of Education. I want to see the Secretary of Education answer why API history isn't taught in our schools. I want to understand why it is that they think it's okay for us to leave us out of the federal definition of racial minorities. There's a long way to go, and it starts with all of us deciding to stand up.
So what? I was asking earlier about like what the next steps are. When you think about this as a social justice movement, I've heard you talk about the need to make sure that we don't meet this moment with over criminalization. So what do you mean by that, and what's your fear that could be part of it?
This is a very real conversation to talk about what justice means. And restorative justice has a lot of different opinions on what it is. For me, justice means education. Justice means empathy. I understand that there are people who want to rely on the criminal justice system. I completely understand that. I think restorative justice is really about asking the victim what it is that they want and how they will heal, right? What I'm talking about here is, how do we address the structural root of racism? And that truly does stem from making sure that our stories are told.
I've heard some people make the argument that one reason that the country has allowed hate crimes against the AAPI community to go on, not just unchecked, but without even being much remarked on by the public, is that it doesn't fit into the kind of narrative structures that we've set up in order to discuss violence and crime and policing. Do you think that's right, or do you think that analysis is missing a piece?
I think what that analysis is trying to get at is grappling with the model minority myth. So the model minority myth is this idea that, AAPI community as a minority is a model minority in the fact that if we stay silent, put our heads down, and don't really make a ruckus and just accept the grief in silence, that one day we will be handed the keys to the kingdom. And that has not proven to actually work out. There's a concept called the bamboo ceiling. It's equivalent to the glass ceiling, where people who, Asian Americans, work through the corporate process, don't actually make it past C-suite, or rather to C-suite jobs. So what is important to understand here is that we are only able to heal as a country if we are, one, able to recognize that there is pain going on within the AAPI community. You know, you cannot be anti-racist without acknowledging the Asian American Pacific Islander experience and without actually realizing that AAPIs are not a monolith. We are made up of so many different communities. So that's part one. Part two then is how do we move together, cross communities, building solidarity.
Is that expansive number of communities that you're talking about? Do you think that that has something to do with an inability to organize more broadly around this effort? I mean, just the nomenclature itself of AAPI, begins to bring in, that's already a number of communities, but within each one of those, you have so many different separate communities as well who have their own unique American experiences.
There's no doubt that the fact that we come from so many different places, the fact that we don't share a language is more difficult in organizing. But I want to say that the response that I have seen over these past few weeks, the zeitgeist moment that we are in, shows that there's a new Asian American movement emerging, and we're not going to be silent anymore. We are not your model minority. We are human, we deserve equal dignity, and we are coming together to ask people to speak us into the consciousness of this country.
Amanda Nguyen, her organization is called Rise. Thank you so much for joining us, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.